She said, "You'll die if you stay." He answered, "Then I'll die here." The sun had already begun to sink when the stranger rode into Ashvale, a dying town clinging to the edge of the desert. Wind dragged dust across the empty main street, whispering between the shutters of abandoned stores and the bones of dreams that never quite made it west. His name was Jonas Creed, though nobody in Ashvale knew it yet. He rode with a limp, blood on his sleeve, and a colt that had seen too much killing. His horse stumbled under him, ribs showing, every step a prayer to reach water. The sign above the saloon read, "The Silver Mare." Only 2 lamps flickered in the windows. He tied his horse, walked inside, and the floorboards creaked like they didn't want him there. A woman looked up from behind the counter. Early 30s, hair pinned but stubbornly escaping, sleeves rolled past her elbows. She was cleaning glasses that didn't need cleaning, one of those habits born from nerves or loneliness. "You look half dead," she said, voice soft but steady. Jonas took off his hat. "The other half's just tired." She studied him, cautious, as the piano in the corner played itself out and died. There were only 3 men drinking, all of them watching. "Name's Mara," she said finally. "You want whiskey or a doctor?" "Whiskey," Jonas said. "Doctor can wait." He sat, the stool groaning beneath his weight. The bottle came amber and quiet. He poured, drank and exhaled like it burned the ghosts out of him. Outside, thunder rolled far off, dry thunder, the kind that never brings rain. Mara leaned on the counter. "You bring trouble with you?" Jonas didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the door, the mirror, and the road outside all at once. Years of habit. After a long silence, he said, "Does trouble come free with the whiskey, or do I have to pay extra?" She didn't smile. "In this town, you pay for everything." That's when the sound came, horses. Maybe 6, maybe 8, hooves hammering closer. Jonas's hand drifted toward the gun at his hip. Mara saw it. "You shouldn't stay," she said quietly. "You'll die if you stay." Jonas turned to her, calm as stone. "Then I'll die here." And the thunder outside grew louder. No storm, just men on horseback. They stopped outside the saloon. The swinging doors trembled. A voice called out, loud and confident, "Jonas Creed!" "You've run far enough." Mara froze. The 3 men at the bar slipped away, chairs scraping, boots dragging. Jonas finished his drink, set the glass down gently, and looked at her once more. "You might want to get down." Then he stood, turned toward the door, and waited. The wind pushed dust through the cracks, carrying the smell of gun oil and fear. When the first man stepped inside, gun drawn, Jonas didn't move. Not yet. He wanted them all to see his face, to know the man they came to kill was already done running. "You made it," Jonas said softly. "Now let's finish it." The sound that followed split the silence clean in half. Gunfire, shattered glass, a scream from somewhere behind the bar. When the smoke cleared, 3 men lay dead, one crawling toward the door and the others gone. Jonas stood in the haze, blood on his sleeve, breathing steady. He turned to Mara. "Told you the doctor could wait." She stared at him, trembling, trying to make sense of the carnage in her bar. "You're bleeding," she said. He looked down. "Not the first time. They'll come back," she whispered. "Whoever you are, they'll bring more." Jonas looked past her to the door where the wind was already sweeping dust over the dead. "Then I'll be here," he said. Outside, the last light of day fell across the bodies, turning the street red. The town of Ashvale had a new ghost walking its dirt, and this one still breathed. Morning came slow to Ashvale, the kind of slow that makes a man wonder if the sun just gave up on rising over this cursed patch of earth. Smoke still curled from the saloon's broken windows. The smell of gunpowder hung in the air like a memory that refused to fade. Jonas Creed sat outside on the saloon steps, hat pulled low, bleeding through the sleeve of his shirt. His horse was gone, spooked, maybe stolen, but he didn't seem to care. Inside, Mara swept glass into a bucket, each crack of the broom against the floor sharp as thunder. The bloodstains on the boards wouldn't come out. She tried water, whiskey, even lye. The color stayed. She glanced at him through the open doorway. He hadn't moved much since dawn. He just sat there, breathing dust, eyes fixed on nothing. "You planning to sit there till the vultures name you their mayor?" she asked finally. He looked up, the corner of his mouth twitching. "Depends how polite they are." She shook her head, tossed the broom aside. "You killed 3 men in my bar. That kind of thing sticks." Folks here don't forget. Jonas stood slow and steady like a man used to his own pain. Then maybe it's time they started remembering who they are. What's that supposed to mean? He nodded down the street. Half these men used to carry rifles for the Union, the other half for the South. They came out here to start new, but the first man with a badge or a coin made them crawl again. Mara crossed her arms. You think you can fix that by gunning men down in my saloon? He looked at her then, really looked, and for a moment the gunslinger mask cracked. I didn't come here to fix anything, he said. Just ran out of places to run. She stared at him, and for the first time she didn't see a killer. She saw a man who looked tired of breathing. Still, she wasn't one for sympathy. Not anymore. You keep bleeding like that, you won't have to run anywhere, she muttered. Sit down. I'll stitch you up before you bleed on my floor again. He hesitated, then followed her inside. The saloon felt different in daylight, quieter, sadder. Dust floated in sunbeams like ash from a dying fire. She led him behind the bar, where the mirror was cracked and the counter still slick with last night's whiskey. She fetched a needle and thread, dipped it in whiskey, and nodded toward his arm. Take off your coat, he did. The bullet had grazed him, deep enough to hurt, shallow enough to live. You sew like you pour drinks? He asked as she worked. Better, she said. One mistake and a man dies. That keeps me focused. He didn't flinch when the needle went in. She didn't talk much either, only breathed focused, her hands steady even as the wind rattled the windows. After a while she asked quietly, Those men, who were they? Bounty hunters, he said. Used to ride for a man named Jeb Mercer. He owns half the cattle between here and Amarillo. Her eyes darkened. And the other half? He's coming for it. Mara stopped sewing. Mercer's men ride through here sometimes. They take what they want. Sheriff doesn't lift a finger. Jonas nodded. That's because Mercer pays him to look the other way. She sighed, tied the stitch and cut the thread with her teeth. And now that you've killed Mercer's dogs, he'll be sending wolves. Jonas stood, pulling his coat back on, flexing the arm she'd mended. Then I'll make sure they don't find you. Her eyes flashed. You don't even know me. He looked at her, voice low. Don't need to. I know what fear looks like, and you've lived with it too long. Mara didn't answer. She just walked to the window, staring out at the street where dust rolled like fog. You should leave, she said. You'll die if you stay. Jonas's reflection looked back at her in the cracked glass. He smiled faintly, sad and stubborn. Then I'll die here. The silence after that was heavy enough to crush the air. A single rider appeared at the end of the street, silhouetted by sunlight. Then 2 more. Then 5. Mara's voice trembled when she spoke. He sent them already. Jonas stepped past her, loading his gun with slow precision. Good, he said. I was starting to get bored. She grabbed his arm. You can't fight them all. He looked at her hand on his sleeve, then back at her face. Watch me. And with that he walked into the sunlight, one man against the coming storm. By noon, the dust on Asheville's main street was boiling under the sun, the kind of heat that makes men short-tempered and guns quick to rise. 5 riders came in slow, deliberate, like they wanted every soul in town to see them coming. Their horses kicked up red dust that hung in the air long after they stopped. At their front rode a man in a black duster and a grey hat. His name was Vance Mercer, younger brother to the infamous cattle baron Jeb Mercer. He had the same ice-cold eyes and a smile that could sour milk. He looked around the empty street, spit, and called out, "Where's the sheriff of this ghost town?" No one answered. The only sound was the wind knocking a loose shutter against a wall. Vance turned his horse toward the saloon, the Silver Mare. The door swung lazily in the heat. Inside, Mara stood behind the bar again, shoulders straight, face calm though her hands trembled beneath the counter. Jonas Creed was there too, sitting in the same chair he had the night before, his hat low, a single glass beside his hand. Vance stepped inside, his spurs ringing sharp against the floorboards. His men spread out behind him, grinning like coyotes around a campfire. "Afternoon, miss," Vance said, tipping his hat. "We're looking for a man. Tall, scar on his cheek, goes by the name Jonas Creed. You seen him?" Mara didn't blink. "Can't say I have," Vance smiled. "That so?" He walked closer, dragged a finger across the counter, tasting the dust. "See, word's out that Creed killed 3 of my men last night. Now that's a problem. A man who kills Mercers don't get to vanish easy." Jonas lifted his glass, took a slow sip. Maybe you just ain't looking hard enough. The saloon went still. Vance turned, eyes narrowing. Well, I'll be damned. Most folks say that, Jonas said, right before I send them to meet him. The room held its breath. Vance grinned, tapping his holster. You got grit, Creed, I'll give you that. But you're standing on Mercer land now. You spill Mercer blood here, you don't get to leave alive. Jonas leaned back, voice low. I ain't planning to leave. One of the gunmen behind Vance snorted. Big words for a dead man. Jonas looked at him, calm as ever. Then come prove it. The man went for his gun, too fast, too eager. Jonas didn't even stand. 2 shots rang out, close enough to sound like one. When the smoke cleared, the Mercer man was on the floor, a red hole in his chest, eyes wide with surprise. Vance's grin faded. You just made a mistake you can't fix. Jonas rose, slow and deliberate. Wasn't trying to fix anything. Mara's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. Vance's men drew their guns, 5 against 1. But Jonas didn't move, not yet. He said quietly, Tell your brother he should have come himself. Vance spat on the floor, eyes full of venom. He will. When he does, he'll burn this town down around your corpse. Jonas nodded once. Then I guess I'll save him the trip. Vance turned, motioning to his men. Let's go, boys. Let him enjoy what's left of his days. He paused at the door. He'll wish you'd run, Creed. The next time we ride in, we won't stop to talk. When they left, the silence in the saloon felt heavier than gun smoke. Mara finally exhaled, her hands shaking as she set the bottle back on the shelf. You should have let them take you, she said. Now they'll come back for all of us. Jonas looked at her, expression unreadable. Wouldn't matter. Mercer's the kind of man who burns what he can't own. She turned away, frustrated. You don't understand. This town, these people, they've already lost everything once. Jonas picked up his hat, dusted it off. Then maybe it's time they stop losing. She faced him, eyes sharp. And you're gonna save them, is that it? 1 broken gunslinger against 100 riders? Jonas's gaze met hers, steady, unflinching. No, he said. But I'll make Mercer remember my name every time he tries to sleep. Mara wanted to hate him for his stubbornness, but part of her couldn't. There was something in the way he stood, the way he didn't flinch when death came knocking. Something that stirred a memory of who she used to be before fear built her cage. Outside, the wind began to howl again, carrying the scent of dust and iron. Ashvale wasn't just waiting for a fight anymore. It was waiting for a reckoning, and Jonas Creed and the man from the dust had just lit the fuse. Ashvale was never a loud town. Voight breathed slow, whispered soft, like even the wind was scared to wake something it couldn't kill. But the morning after the Mercers rode through, silence took on a new shape. The kind of silence that watches, that judges. Jonas Creed felt it before he saw it. Every step he took down the street carried eyes behind curtains, whispers behind doors. The townsfolk didn't thank him for standing his ground. They didn't even nod. They just looked away, afraid that meeting his gaze might bring the Mercers down on them too. He stopped at the blacksmith's, where an old man with soot-stained hands hammered quietly. Need some ammo, Jonas said. The blacksmith didn't look up. Don't sell to dead men. Jonas smiled faintly. Guess you'll miss out on the coin then. The hammer stopped. The old man looked up, eyes tired, voice low. You don't understand, son. Mercer's got men in every town from here to the Picos. They hang folks just for speaking your name. You stay here and you'll bring hell with you. Jonas nodded once. Maybe that's what this place needs. Then he dropped a silver coin on the anvil and walked away. Inside the saloon, Mara stood behind the bar again. But this time there were no customers, no music, no laughter. Just dust motes swirling in the shafts of light cutting through the cracked windows. She'd spent the morning nailing boards over bullet holes, scrubbing blood that wouldn't fade. Every mark felt like a reminder. You let him stay. When the door creaked open, she didn't have to look to know who it was. Jonas moved like a shadow, quiet but heavy, carrying a presence that filled the whole room. You got the whole town scared, she said, not turning. Fear's an old friend, he answered. She set the hammer down, finally facing him. You don't get it. These people just want to survive. You stay here and Mercer will wipe us all off the map. Jonas leaned on the counter, eyes calm, voice quiet. You think if I ride out he'll leave you alone? You think men like him forget. He'll come whether I'm here or not. Then why not give him less reason? He smiled without humor. I already gave him reason the day I stopped working for him. Mara froze. You what? He nodded. Used to ride with his men. Before I saw what kind of man Mercer really was. Before I realized there's worse things than dying. She stepped back, stunned. You were one of them? Was, he said simply. Not anymore. For a moment the air between them turned sharp. Mara saw the truth in his eyes. Regret, guilt, and something else. Something that looked a lot like atonement. You can't wash blood off your hands with more blood, she whispered. Jonas looked toward the door. Maybe not. But I can make sure the next blood ain't yours. Mara's voice broke slightly. You'll die if you stay. He turned back to her, the faintest smile in his eyes. Then I'll die here. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him that dying wasn't noble, that it wouldn't change anything, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she said softly, you remind me of my husband. He stayed too. Jonas looked at her but didn't ask. Mara's gaze drifted to the empty chair near the piano. 3 years ago, Mercer's men came for him. Said he owed money. He tried to stand his ground. Jonas's jaw clenched. They kill him? Worse, she said. For they left him alive long enough for me to watch him die. For a long while, neither of them spoke. Only the sound of the wind slipping through the cracks in the boards filled the room. Then Jonas said quietly, I'm sorry. Mara gave a hollow laugh. You didn't kill him. Didn't stop it either, he said, voice low. That makes us both guilty. She looked at him then, and for the first time, there wasn't anger in her eyes, just exhaustion. You can't win, Jonas. Maybe not, he said. But if Mercer wants this town, he's got to walk through me to get it. Outside, thunder rolled across the plains again, but this time it wasn't weather. It was hooves. Mara's face went pale. They're coming back. Jonas pulled his revolver, spun the chamber, checked every bullet. Told you they would. Then what do we do? He holstered the gun, tipped his hat. We make 'em regret riding in. Mara stared at him. A man who'd already accepted his death, and somehow that made her want to live. As he stepped out the door, she whispered after him, God help us all. The sky was bruised with dust as riders appeared again on the horizon. Mercer's men, but a dozen this time. Ashvale was about to bleed again, and Jonas Creed stood waiting, calm as a man who'd already seen hell and was ready to walk through it one more time. Night came early to Ashvale, the kind of night where the sky feels close, heavy, and mean, like it's holding its breath for something bad to happen. Jonas Creed sat behind the saloon, oiling his revolver in the flickering light of a kerosene lamp. He moved with quiet precision, each click, each spin, as if it were prayer and punishment rolled into one. Mara came out back carrying a tin plate of stew and a canteen. Figured you'd forget to eat, she said, setting it down beside him. He nodded, murmuring, thank you. She sat across from him, folding her arms. You gonna tell me why Mercer wants you dead? Jonas wiped the revolver barrel clean, eyes distant. Because I stopped being useful to him. That's not an answer, he sighed. You sure you want the truth? I've heard worse. He stared into the desert beyond the saloon. Nothing but black sand and ghosts of wind. Then he started talking. 5 years ago I rode with Jeb Mercer. He was just a rancher back then, rich, mean, and ambitious. He paid good coin for men who didn't ask questions. So I didn't. I rode with his crew, collected debts, cleared out squatters, broke fences. If a man said no to Mercer, I made him say yes. And if he still refused... He paused, jaw tight. I was good at killing, Mara, too good. Didn't realize how much of myself I'd traded until it was gone. She watched him quietly. No judgment, just a slow sadness in her eyes. One night, Mercer sent me to a farm outside Abilene. Said the man owed him stock. When I got there, it wasn't a man. It was a family. Wife, 2 little ones, and a father too old to fight. They had nothing but a few sick cattle and dry land. Mara's breath caught. What did you do? Jonas swallowed hard. I told Mercer they were gone. That I burned the place. But I didn't. I took what money I had, told him to leave before morning. They left. But Mercer found out. He stared at the revolver in his hands, voice lower now like gravel and regret. He made an example of me, tied me to a post, let his men take turns beating me till I couldn't stand. Then he burned that same farm anyway. Said mercy's bad for business. Mara's eyes filled, but she blinked them clear. So you ran? Yeah, but running don't wash blood off your hands. You just track it wherever you go. For a long moment, they just sat there, The only sound, the wind and the distant howl of a coyote. Finally, Mara said softly, "And now you think staying here will make it right?" Jonas looked at her, expression unreadable. "No, but I can make sure Mercer don't hurt anyone else." "Maybe that's enough." She stood, shaking her head. "You'll die trying." "I know." She turned away angry, not at him but at the world that made men like him necessary. "You could have left, Jonas. Nobody would have blamed you." He looked out toward the desert again, voice low and steady. "I've been running my whole life. Every trail ends somewhere. Might as well end here." Later that night, Mara found herself staring at him from the upstairs window, the way he sat alone by the lamp, the way the light caught the scar on his cheek. He looked like a man waiting for judgment, and maybe, she thought, he didn't deserve it as much as he believed. Somewhere out there in the dark, wolves howled again, long hungry cries echoing through the canyon. But they weren't wolves. They were riders, Mercer's men. Mara's hand tightened on the windowsill. "God help us," she whispered. Below, Jonas looked up at the stars, then at the gun resting across his knees. He didn't pray, didn't flinch, didn't move. He just waited, for the storm he'd been chasing his whole life to finally find him. The night burned red on the horizon. Somewhere beyond the ridge, campfires glowed like watchful eyes. Mercer's men. They were out there waiting for daylight to ride in and finish what they started. Jonas Creed stood outside the silver mare, cigarette between his fingers, watching the embers fall to the dirt. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't praying. He was just still, like a man who'd already made peace with what was coming. Behind him, the saloon door creaked. Mara stepped out, her shawl wrapped tight against the desert chill. "They're close," she said quietly. Jonas nodded. "Yeah, they'll wait for sunup. Mercer likes to kill when everybody can see." She studied him in the dim light, the lines on his face, the exhaustion in his eyes. "You really mean to stand out there alone?" "Wouldn't be the first time." Mara took a slow breath. "Jonas, you don't have to do this." He looked at her, voice low, steady. "Yeah, I do. Why?" She pressed. "Why here? Why now? You could ride out tonight, vanish into the hills. Nobody would blame you." Jonas flicked the cigarette away, eyes still on the horizon. "Because a man can only run from his shadow for so long." "I'm done running." Mara's voice trembled. "You'll die if you stay." He turned to her, a faint smile beneath the brim of his hat. "Then I'll die here." The words hung between them, heavy, final. For a long time, neither spoke. The wind whispered through the street, carrying sand and silence. Finally, Mara stepped closer. "If you're set on dying," she said softly, "at least let me stand beside you." He shook his head. "You've done enough," her eyes flashed. "You think I'm some helpless saloon girl waiting for a man to save her? I buried my husband with my own hands, Creed. Don't tell me what I can't do." He met her stare, and for once his voice softened. "You remind me of her," he said quietly. Mara frowned. "Of who?" "My wife." Her breath caught. "Mercer's men killed her when I walked away. Said I left debts unpaid. She begged me to leave it all behind. I didn't listen. By the time I came back, she was gone. Just a burned house and a cross made from fence wood." Mara's eyes glistened. "Jonas?" He shook his head. "No pity, I earned it. Every scar, every grave. But this time I'm not letting another woman die because I ran." For a moment all she could do was look at him, the weight he carried, the quiet grief that never left his eyes. Then she said softly, "If you're going to stand for something, I'll stand with you." He studied her, the corners of his mouth twitching like he wanted to argue, but knew it'd be useless. "So you're stubborn, so I've been told." He chuckled, a dry, tired sound, and turned toward the saloon door. "Lock up, get what you need. When sun comes up, they'll ride straight through the front." Inside the saloon, they began to prepare. Jonas checked rifles, loaded rounds, stacked bottles of whiskey for makeshift fire traps. Mara nailed boards over the windows, her hands blistered and bleeding. But she didn't stop. When she passed by him, their eyes met for a heartbeat, the kind of silence that says everything words can't. Finally, she asked, "How many do you think there are?" "At least 30, she blinked. "And you've got one good arm and a woman who's never fired a gun." He smirked. "Reckon that evens the odds." She almost smiled, shaking her head. "You're insane." "Maybe, but I've been worse things." Later, when the candles burned low and the night grew still, Jonas sat by the window staring into the dark. Mara sat beside him, holding the rifle he'd taught her to load. She asked quietly, "You afraid?" He thought about it, then said, "Only of dying for nothing." "You won't," she said. "Not this time." Jonas looked at her, really looked, and something unspoken passed between them. Something fragile, fierce, and far too late. Outside, the first rooster crowed in the distance. A thin line of pale orange light split the horizon. Jonas stood, holstered his gun, and took one last look around the empty saloon. "Sun's up," he said. "Time to make a deal with death." Mara followed him to the door, rifle clutched tight. "Then let's hope death keeps his word." As the light spilled over Ashvale, the dust began to rise again. And on the far ridge, 30 riders appeared, black silhouettes against a blood-colored dawn. Jonas Creed stepped out into the street. Mara stood at the saloon door behind him. No one else came, just 2 souls against an army. The sun climbed slow and cruel over Ashvale. By the time the first light reached the saloon, the street was already filling with dust kicked up by hooves. Mercer's riders, black coats, wide hats, rifles gleaming. They came in a line, silent but sure, like vultures that had finally smelled blood. Jonas Creed stepped into the center of the street. The brim of his hat shadowed his eyes, the morning light cutting across the scars on his jaw. His hand hovered near his holster, not nervous, just waiting. From the lead horse came a tall man with a pale scar across his face. Jeb Mercer. Same cold smile, same eyes that never blinked. "Jonas Creed," Mercer called, his voice echoing through the dusty street. "Didn't think you had the guts to stay put." Jonas spat into the dirt. "You wanted me, Mercer?" "I'm right here," Mercer chuckled. "You look smaller than I remember. Guess time and guilt'll do that to a man." "You should have kept riding," Jonas said. "Ain't much left here for you but a grave." "Grave's already yours, Creed," Mercer sneered. "I'm just here to fill it." From behind the saloon doors, Mara watched, breath trembling. Her hands shook as she loaded another round into the rifle. She could see Mercer's men fanning out, some taking cover, some already aiming at the saloon. Jonas stood tall, unmoving. "You come for me, Mercer. Leave the town be," Mercer smirked. "The town? Hell, this place has been dead for years. You're the only thing left worth killing." He raised his hand. And then, like thunder cracking open the sky, gunfire exploded. The first bullet grazed Jonas's shoulder, spinning him sideways. He hit the dirt, rolled, and came up firing. 2 of Mercer's men dropped instantly. From inside the saloon, Mara threw open the shutters and fired toward the riders. The blast echoed off the walls, splintering wood and glass. "Jonas!" she shouted. "Keep low!" he yelled back. She ducked as a round tore through the window frame. Splinters cut her cheek, but she didn't stop. She reloaded, breath shaking but eyes fierce. Outside, Jonas moved like a shadow, ducking between troughs, hitching posts and barrels. He picked off another man near the stable. Then another. The air was thick with smoke and gunpowder, the street littered with shell casings and broken glass. But Mercer's men kept coming. By midday, the saloon was half ruined. Windows gone, roof peppered with holes. Mara's hands were raw from reloading, her dress torn and soaked with sweat. Jonas stumbled inside, bleeding from the arm, his hat gone, eyes wild. "They ain't quittin'," he said. "Neither are we," Mara shot back. He gave a half smile. "Didn't figure you for stubborn. Guess you don't know me yet." A bullet shattered a whiskey bottle behind them. Both flinched. Jonas grunted. "That was the good stuff. Then don't miss the next one." They shared a quick, breathless laugh, the kind that comes only when death's breathing down your neck. By nightfall, the gunfire slowed. Mercer's men had pulled back to the edge of town. The street was quiet, except for the moan of the wind and the crackle of small fires still burning. Jonas leaned against the bar, pale and bleeding. Mara tore strips of cloth from her dress, wrapping his arm tight. "You're losing too much blood," she whispered. "Ain't dead yet." She pressed the bandage harder. "Don't make jokes, Creed, not now." He met her eyes, tired, soft. "If I stop joking, I start thinking, and I ain't ready for that." She shook her head, blinking tears. "You're impossible." "And you're still here," he murmured. For a long second, the war outside disappeared. Just her, him, and the faint sound of rain starting to fall. Kate pattered against the broken windows, turning the dust to mud, washing the blood into the earth. Jonas looked toward the door. "They'll come again at dawn. Mercer ain't done, Mara swallowed. Then we make it count, he smiled faintly. You ever think maybe you were meant for something bigger than serving drinks in a place like this? Right now I'm meant to keep you alive. Reckon that's big enough for me. Outside lightning flashed across the desert sky. In that brief white light they could see them. The riders regrouping on the ridge, dark shapes against the storm. Mara's voice dropped to a whisper. It's going to be a long night. Jonas checked the cylinder on his revolver, then slid another bullet in slow and sure. Then we best make it worth remembering. The rain came harder, soaking the street, washing away the tracks of the dead. Inside, the two of them sat in silence, listening to the thunder roll over the hills. Neither said a word. Both knew what tomorrow would bring. But for now, in the heart of a dying town, beneath the echo of gunfire and rain, they were alive, and that was enough. The rain stopped just before sunrise. What was left of the night clung to the town like smoke, heavy, quiet, waiting. Ashvale looked like a ghost of itself. Broken windows, bullet holes, empty streets lined with bodies half buried in mud. Jonas Creed stood by the saloon door, revolver at his hip, his left arm bound in blood-stained cloth. He hadn't slept. He just stared at the horizon, that thin, pale line of light crawling its way across the desert. Behind him, Mara moved quietly, gathering what little ammo was left. Every movement was slow and careful, not out of fear, but because she was running on nothing but will now. How many you figure left? She asked. Jonas didn't turn. Mercer'll have maybe a dozen men left. He'll come himself this time. Mara's hands froze. You sure? He ain't the kind to let someone else finish what he started. She glanced at him, at the wear in his eyes, the way he seemed half dead already, but still standing like he had one more fight left in him. Jonas, she said softly, if you don't walk away after this, no one will remember what you stood for. Just the blood you left behind. He looked at her then, quiet for a moment. Maybe, but I'll know. Mara swallowed the lump in her throat. You could still go. Take one of the horses, ride west before they reach town. Jonas chuckled, dry and low. You ever seen a man outrun his own past? She didn't answer. He stepped closer, eyes steady. You should leave, Mara. When this starts, I ain't going to be able to watch your back. She crossed her arms. Not leaving. Don't you make me, she cut in, voice sharp. You told me I remind you of your wife. Maybe that's why you're trying to push me away. But I'm not her, Jonas. I'm not running. He froze, the fight in her words cutting straight through him. Then slowly he nodded. Guess I deserve that. You do, he smiled faintly, then looked back at the horizon. All right then. We finish this together. The first light of dawn spilled into the street, catching the wet mud and broken glass. Somewhere out there hooves thundered against the ground. Jonas squinted through the glare. Dust rose in the distance, a dozen riders in formation, and in the center, a white horse carrying Jeb Mercer. He's here, Jonas said. Mara's hand tightened around her rifle. Then let's give him the welcome he deserves. They moved fast. Jonas set up behind the trough, rifle braced on the wood. Mara took the window on the second floor, eyes steady through the scope of the borrowed gun. The riders came closer. The sound was thunder now, hooves pounding, leather creaking. Men shouting. Jonas could see Mercer's face clear as the sun. Calm, confident. The look of a man who believed the world owed him obedience. Then, suddenly the world exploded again. Gunfire roared. Jonas fired first, hitting the lead rider. The man tumbled from his horse, crashing into the mud. Mara fired next, her shot clean, perfect. Another man down before he hit the ground. Nice shot, Jonas yelled. You taught me, she shouted back. Bullets tore through the air, smashing glass, ripping wood, cutting through the saloon walls like paper. Jonas ducked, reloaded, fired again. Each pull of the trigger echoed like a heartbeat. Steady, brutal, determined. But Mercer's men were pushing closer, riding hard through the smoke and rain. Jonas felt the sting of a bullet graze his ribs. He staggered, breath catching, then fired back with his last round. The gun clicked empty. He dropped behind cover, fumbling for more shells, but the pouch was empty. Mara saw him struggling from above. Without thinking, she leapt from the stairs and ran through the open doorway, sliding across the mud toward him. You're gonna get yourself killed, he barked. So will you if I don't. She shoved spare ammo into his hand, then turned back to fire at the riders. The recoil nearly knocked her off her feet, but she held firm, teeth gritted, heart pounding. Jonas looked at her, drenched, shaking, fearless. Something fierce and protective lit in his chest. He stood, fired again and again until Mercer's line finally broke. Half his men were down. The rest fell back toward the ridge, then silence. Smoke drifted through the street. Only Mercer remained, sitting tall on his white horse, rifle in hand. Jonas stepped out from behind cover, chest heaving. Mara called out, "Jonas, don't!" But he didn't stop. He walked out into the open street and the same one they'd first met on and called out, "It's just you and me now, Mercer." Mercer grinned, dismounted, and started walking forward, rifle slung low. Always was. They stopped 10 paces apart. The whole town seemed to hold its breath. Mara watched from the doorway, heart hammering, rainwater running down her face. Mercer's hand hovered near his gun. "You sure you want to finish this, Creed? Could walk away. Nobody'd blame you," Jonas smirked. "You've been saying that your whole life. But you're the one who can't let go." "I gave you a chance once," Mercer said, voice cold. "You threw it away." "No," Jonas answered, steady as stone. "I finally took it." They stood still, just the sound of rain, wind, and the soft click of metal as both men drew. The rain had stopped, but the ground still steamed, turning Ashvale Street into a mirror of red-brown mud. Smoke hung low, lazy, curling around the boots of the two men who hadn't fallen yet. Jonas Creed faced Jeb Mercer in the open street, 10 paces apart, two shadows in the pale gold of dawn. Every window in town was empty. Every door shut tight. Even the wind seemed afraid to breathe. Mara stood in the saloon doorway, hands pressed against the frame, whispering a prayer she didn't know she still remembered. Jonas spoke first. "You burned a good woman's home, Mercer. Took her from me. Took my soul with her," Mercer smirked. "Ain't my fault you didn't know how to keep what was yours." Jonas's eyes narrowed. "You never understood. Nothing was ever yours to keep. You just stole and called it living." Mercer stepped forward 1 pace. "You sound like a preacher, Creed. You forget who you are." "No," Jonas said softly. "I finally remember." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Then both men moved. 2 gun flashes, 1 sound. A single heartbeat stretched into forever. Mercer's bullet tore through Jonas's coat, grazing his ribs. Jonas's shot hit Mercer square in the chest, just above the vest line. Mercer staggered, dropped his revolver and fell to his knees. Eyes wide with disbelief, he coughed once, crimson spilling between his teeth. You ain't supposed to win." Jonas holstered his gun slow, walked toward him. "Wasn't about winning." Mercer gasped for air, trembling. "Then what the hell was it for?" Jonas crouched beside him, voice calm. "For her. For all of them. For the folks you buried and forgot." Mercer's eyes dimmed. He slumped into the mud, his hand twitching once before it went still. For the first time in years, the town of Ashvale was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that waits for trouble, but the kind that means it's finally over. Jonas stood over Mercer's body for a long time. The light from the sunrise touched his face, soft and gold. He looked older suddenly, worn, hollow, free. Mara came out slowly, rifle still in hand. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Is it done?" Jonas nodded once. "Yeah," she stepped closer, studying him. "You're hit. Just a scratch." "Jonas—" He met her eyes and the tough smile he always wore faltered. The color had already drained from his face. He swayed. Mara dropped the rifle and ran to catch him. He stumbled against her shoulder, blood soaking through the bandage. "You fool," she whispered. "You fool of a man." He smiled weakly. "Told you I'd die here." "No," she said fiercely. "Not like this. Not after all that." He looked past her at the horizon where the sun was breaking clean over the desert. "Look at that light," he murmured. "Ain't it something?" "Jonas, never thought I'd see it without fear." His hand slid from her shoulder, resting in the dirt. For a moment she thought he was gone. Then he spoke again, barely a breath. "Tell him I wasn't all bad." Mara pressed her forehead against his. "They'll know." And then he was still. The wind picked up, carrying the dust down the street over Mercer's body, over Jonas Creed, over the bullet-scarred saloon that had become their last stand. The town sighed, like the desert itself was letting go. Mara sat beside him until the sun climbed high. When she finally stood, her face was streaked with dirt and tears. But her eyes were steady. She looked out over the town, whispering, "You stayed. Jonas, you kept your word. Then she turned toward the road west, the same road that had once brought him here. She picked up his hat, set it on her head, and walked into the rising light. Ashvale was quiet again, but not empty. Not anymore. 3 days after the gun smoke cleared, the town of Ashvale was still and hollow, a shell of wood and dust clinging to what was left of its pride. The bodies were gone now, buried in shallow graves along the ridge. Mara Gray dug most of them herself, one by one, under the sun that never seemed to rest. But she saved one grave for last. Right there on the edge of town, where the wind touched first at dawn and the light always hit the softest, the grave of Jonas Creed. She laid him down herself, wrapped in a plain canvas sheet, the brim of his hat folded neatly on his chest. When she finished covering the last mound of earth, she sat beside it, dust-caked on her hands, lips cracked from heat, and for a long while she said nothing. When the words finally came, they were barely a whisper. "You said you'd die here, and you did." The wind moved across the plains, carrying her voice into the endless blue. "You could have run, Creed. God knows I begged you to. But maybe the world needed one man to stand still." She looked down at the grave, tracing the shape of his name she'd carved into a scrap of old saloon wood. Jonas Creed, he stayed. Days passed. Travelers began to pass through again. Ranch hands, drifters, a preacher or two. Word spread fast. Ashvale had fought back. They'd ask Mara what really happened and who took on Mercer's gang, who brought peace to that cursed patch of desert. And every time, she'd pour a whiskey, lean her elbows on the bar of the rebuilt silver mare, and tell them there was a man once, name of Jonas Creed, came here looking to hide from the things he'd done. But when the devil came for this town, he didn't run. He stood his ground. Sometimes the travelers would ask, was he a good man? And she'd pause, always the same long, quiet pause, before saying, no, but he tried to be. And that's worth remembering. One night, as the last customers left and the lamps burned low, Mara stepped outside and looked toward the ridge. The sky was clear, 1,000 stars sharp against the black. The wind whispered through the sage, soft and steady. She smiled faintly. You got what you wanted, Creed, she murmured. Peace. She stood there a while longer, letting the night wrap around her. Then she turned, locked the saloon door and went inside. Years later, folks passing through would still talk about the gunslinger who wouldn't run. Some said he was a killer looking for redemption. Others swore he was a hero sent by God to clean the land, but those who knew better, those who'd sat across from Mara Gray and heard the story in her own voice, they'd say it different. They'd say Jonas Creed wasn't a legend. He was just a man who finally stopped running, and somehow that was enough to make him one. And so Ashvale lived on, not because it was strong, not because it was rich, but because one man chose to stay when everything told him to leave. When the sun set behind the western hills, the wind would pass through the empty street and rattle the old saloon sign still hanging by one chain. It creaked softly in the breeze, whispering to no one in particular. He stayed. And somewhere out there, where the desert meets the horizon, you could almost swear you saw a lone figure, riding slow into the light. Sometimes it ain't about how long a man lives, but what he's willing to stand for before the end. Jonas Creed didn't die for glory or for revenge. He died because he finally found something worth staying for. In a land where most folks run from their past, he faced his. And maybe that's what makes a man a legend. Not the gun he carried, but the heart that refused to leave. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more unforgettable tales from me. And make sure to tap the bell icon so you never miss a new episode. Thanks for watching.